Viereck's poem For an Assyrian Frieze was first published in 1948. The poem takes a cue from Pound in that the poet immerses himself in a long time ago, but unlike Pound, Viereck narrates this picture of Assyrian society in a very regular formal verse. The portrait of the violent, bloodlusting Assyrian society, known as the lion with the prophet's beard, is ironic given the calm regularity of the verse form. Such techniques characterize not only Viereck but also his ideas of cultural conservatism. Let's see the summary of the poem. In the first stanza, Viereck introduces the subject of his poem as bas relief, or a sculpture in which figures are carved so that they protrude out of a stone background from ancient Assyria. Assyria was an ancient kingdom, very powerful in biblical times. It flourished especially from 1000 BC to 606 BC, that stretched from the Tigris and Euphrates basin to modern-day Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. The bas relief shows a lion with a prophet's beard with wonderfully sad eyes. To the narrator, the lion appears to be coming out of the bas relief to stretch its paws just before the terrible king grows wings. At this point, the narrator is imagining rather than simply transcribing the sculpture. He sees the lion fly above the black Euphrates loam, hunting for the enemies of the Nineveh. Nineveh was an important city in the heart of the Assyrian territory in present-day Iraq. In the third stanza of this section, the narrator calls out some of the names of the lion. The names are the names of the powerful kings of the Assyrian Empire, culminating with the first Sargon of Dusharkin. Sargon was one of the greatest kings of Assyria, ruling from 722 BC to 705 BC, and built his palace at Dursharkin near Nineveh. In stanzas 4 and 5, the narrator hears the voice of the lion who channels the spirits of the dead Assyrian kings and begins to understand the character of Assyrian life. This lion speaks of luxuriating while his chariot stormed the town, and of building a pillar of skull so high it stabbed the sun. Here the poet is drawing a contrast between the personal luxury that the king enjoys and the savagery that was the hallmark of the Assyrian Empire. The poet, after hearing this, questions himself, was that the tomb's voice or the desert winds or ours? He does not know where these voices come from, and fears that perhaps he will awaken the spirit of savagery and bloodlust in his own time, drawing an ironic parallel with the unimaginable, industrialized killing perpetrated in particular by the Nazis and carried out in general during the Second World War that had just ended. Stanza 6 makes the central contrast of the poem between the events of the past and how later people understand them explicit. The poet talks about how 4 groups of commentators interpret the lion, the representation of the Assyrian Empire. The scribes explain them as a political act. The saints see his actions in religious terms and condemn him. The skulls of his victims simply sit in silent witness. The lizards, representing the unchanging nature of the desert, grin. Stanzas 7 to 10 understands the historical legacy of this dumb yet eloquent bas relief. The narrator attempts to come to grips with the kind of violence that characterized the ancient world, but is unable to. He refers to the rapture that the Gentiles feared when Joshua made music masterful, alluding to the biblical story of Joshua destroying the city of Jericho. In stanzas 7 and 8, the narrator compares the sinews of a warrior to musical instruments, again emphasizing the foreignness of the bloodlust of the ancient world. But even he is attracted to the primitive energy of this will to violence, saying that earth spawns no gangrene half so luminous as the contagion of those molten eyes. The counterpoint of the terms gangrene, a blood infection that causes limbs to rot and one of the most revolting conditions a human can contract, and luminous, always positive term referring to a lovely glow given off by something, epitomizes the combination of disgust at and attraction to violence and bloodlust that the bas relief inspires in the poet. Peter Viereck presents to the reader through this poem a work of ancient art in desert stone on which is carved a lion with a prophet's beard. The work causes him to imagine the mindset, the ethos of the Assyrian Empire that produced the sculpture. Thinking about Assyria's gleeful bloodlust, he is both repelled and fascinated. The ancient world, the remnants of the ancient world have always been an important topic in Western literature. For centuries after the fall of the Roman Empire, Europeans marveled at the ruins left behind, not understanding how such structures could have been built because the knowledge of engineering and artistic techniques of Romans had been lost. The Renaissance and Enlightenment were spurred on by continued discoveries of ancient artifacts, Egyptian, Greek, and Roman. Western literature springs largely from the Greeks, and for many readers, a poet could not be considered great without somehow engaging in a dialogue with the father of Western poetry, Homer. During the Romantic period of the early 19th century, many of the most important poets took as their main topic the confrontation between ancient civilizations and the modern world. Goethe wrote a book on his time discovering the ruins in the city of Rome, while Keats's famous Ode on a Grecian Urn uses the decoration on an ancient Greek amphora to meditate on the fleeting nature of beauty and to suggest that the classical world put a greater premium on love, beauty, and pleasure than does modern society. But most important precursor of Viereck's poem is Shelley's 1817 sonnet Ozymandias. Ozymandias describes a half-destroyed statue in an antique land, most likely in the Middle East or Egypt. Shelley's poem examines the transitory nature of arrogance and power. In this poem, Viereck goes on even further, looking at a remnant of one of the first civilizations on earth, the Assyrian. Viereck is certainly responding to Shelley, saying that while the power may not last, the violent impulses that help individuals obtain and maintain power do not die out. Poets seem to be noted for pacifism, especially in modern America. We have a hard time thinking of poets as violent people. Our stereotypical image of them represents them as contemplating the beauties of nature, lost in thought, sensitive and artistic. Artists are seen in much the way in our popular. In fact, we often oppose art and violence. The two have little to do with each other, except that art often protests violence. Viereck's poem examines these conflicting emotions in the poet. Confronted by implacable foreigners of this bas relief in which a lion with a prophet's beard represents all of the cruelty and blood of ancient societies, the narrator falls into a reverie, imagining lion to be speaking to him. The lion is the stone embodiment of all of the warlike rulers of the Assyrian Empire, from the early Samshi, who reigned in the 18th century before Christ, to Sargon, who held the throne 1000 years later. The narrator imagines this lion, who is a metonym for the whole Assyrian culture, to be speaking to him, telling him about the way he preened himself while his armies were slaughtering thousands. The narrator cannot understand this love for violence, but when the lion speaks of it, he remembers that other people of that foreign time and land also glorified in violence and slaughter. Even the Israelites, who are the predecessors to the pacifistic early Christians. By describing the lion as having a prophet's beard, Viereck makes this difficult to understand combination even more explicit. We must confront the fact Viereck argues that even those who followed the Hebrew God engaged in this sort of violence. It was not just the Assyrians, those villains of the Old Testament, but it was the Hebrews themselves who slaughtered on a massive scale. And he concludes the poem by saying that luminous gangrene still lives on this earth. Certainly a reference to the war just ended when this poem was written, a war that killed hundreds of times more people than were killed in any Assyrian